They called it a friendship. She called it the only thing that had kept her alive. For nearly 4 years, Tasha Greene, 28, and Renee Carter, 31, shared a bond that went far beyond the labels other people tried to place on it. They met in a place neither of them liked to talk about, a shelter during one of Tasha's darkest winters, and from that day forward, they were inseparable. They shared meals, secrets, plans for the future. To Tasha, Renee wasn't just her closest friend. She was her anchor, her home, the person who made the world feel steady. But anchors can also feel like chains. When Tasha met Michael Rivers, everything shifted. What began as a simple introduction turned into late-night conversations, stolen moments, and the dangerous hope of a new life. For the first time in years, she imagined a future that didn't have Renee in it, and Renee noticed. In the weeks that followed, their easy laughter turned into tense silences, small disagreements into sharp accusations. Until one rainy night, that tension erupted into something irreversible, leaving one woman dead and the other claiming she had no choice. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We read everyone. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next story. Long before the crime, before the betrayal that would tear her life apart, Tasha Greene had already learned what it meant to lose everything. At 24, she had been working part-time at a diner, barely making ends meet, when her mother, the only family member she was close to, died unexpectedly from a stroke. The loss hit her like a wave she couldn't surface from. Her small apartment became a place she rarely left. Her phone calls went unanswered, and the friends she did have drifted away, unsure how to reach her. By winter, she was behind on rent, then evicted, with nothing but 2 duffel bags and a box of old photographs. For weeks, she slept in the corner of a women's shelter, keeping to herself, eating only when hunger left her dizzy. That's where she met Renee Carter. Renee was older, confident in a way that made the chaos around her seem to fade. She had a quick smile, a voice that could be warm or sharp depending on the moment, and an uncanny ability to read people. She noticed Tasha's withdrawn posture, the way she clutched her duffel bags like they were life preservers, and she didn't ask questions. She simply sat beside her at breakfast one morning and said, "No one should have to eat alone." That was the start. Over the next few months, Renee became Tasha's constant. She introduced her to the other women at the shelter, found her a part-time job cleaning offices at night, and helped her get into a subsidized apartment. They began spending nearly every waking hour together, grocery shopping, cooking, watching old movies on a second-hand TV. For Tasha, who had been drowning in grief and instability, Renee's presence was like oxygen. But dependency is a tricky thing. It often hides itself in gratitude. Tasha began to rely on Renee for more than practical help. She sought her approval before making even small decisions, called her whenever she felt anxious, and cancelled plans with others to avoid being away from her for too long. When someone at work invited her out for coffee, her first thought was whether Renee would mind. It wasn't long before people noticed. One neighbour, watching them carry groceries up the stairs together, once joked, "You two act like an old married couple." Renee laughed it off, but later that night, she told Tasha, "People will try to label what they don't understand. We don't need anyone else." That comment stuck with Tasha. At the time, it felt comforting, like their bond was unshakable. But it was also the first sign that this wasn't just friendship, it was possession. Over the years, the closeness between them became an unspoken agreement. They didn't talk about dating other people, didn't introduce new friends into the mix. Renee gave her rides to work, helped her manage her finances, and when Tasha's anxiety flared, she was there, sometimes with comfort, sometimes with blunt reminders of how bad things had been before they met. Tasha told herself she was lucky, that Renee had saved her. And in many ways she had. But somewhere deep down, Tasha knew that her life, her routines, even her sense of self had all become intertwined with Renee's approval. The foreshadowing moment came one summer evening. They were sitting on the stoop outside their building, watching the sun set over the street. Renee handed Tasha a glass of sweet tea and said, almost casually, "We've been through too much to let anyone else come between us." Tasha smiled, but a flicker of unease passed through her. She didn't know why those words felt less like a promise and more like a warning. Michael Rivers came into Tasha's life on an ordinary Thursday. She was standing in the checkout line at the small grocery store on the corner when a man ahead of her dropped his wallet. She picked it up, tapped his shoulder, and was met with warm brown eyes and a disarming smile. He thanked her, introduced himself, and made a casual joke about the line moving slower than traffic on the highway. Tasha laughed, a genuine unguarded laugh she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. He asked if she lived nearby. She hesitated, then nodded. By the time she walked out of the store, he had asked for her number. At first, their exchanges were harmless, a few texts here and there, the occasional phone call. But there was something about the way Michael listened, really listened, that drew her in. He asked about her day, her work, her dreams for the future. No one had asked her those questions in years without also telling her what the answers should be. When Renee found out about Michael, it wasn't because Tasha told her. It was because she overheard a late-night phone call. The next morning, over coffee, Renee's tone was sharp but controlled. "Who's Michael?" she asked. Tasha shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Just someone I met at the store. We've been talking a little." Renee's eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. Talking how? It should have been an innocent question, but the weight behind it made Tasha's stomach knot. Over the next few weeks, the shift in Renee's behavior was subtle, but unmistakable. She started showing up unannounced at Tasha's work, lingering near the bus stop when she knew Tasha would be heading home. She asked more questions, always framed as concern. "Are you eating enough? Are you sure you can trust him?" And yet, when Michael invited Tasha out for coffee, she went. The hour they spent together was easy, light and full of laughter. But when she got home, Renee was sitting on the stoop, arms crossed. "You missed dinner," she said flatly. The air between them grew heavier. Little jokes they once shared went unspoken. Traditions, like their Friday night movie marathons, began to dissolve when Tasha claimed she was too tired or had other plans. The most telling moment came when Tasha mentioned offhand that Michael had offered to help her look for a better job. Renee's response was quick, clipped. "I thought I was the one helping you get back on your feet." It wasn't a question. It was a warning wrapped in familiarity. Then came the announcement that changed everything. One night, after a long conversation with Michael, Tasha told Renee she was thinking about moving in with him. She didn't frame it as final, didn't expect an immediate reaction, but she got one. Renee stared at her, expression unreadable. Then she said quietly, "After everything I've done for you, you'd just walk away?" Tasha didn't answer. It was the first time she realized that wanting her own life might cost her more than she was prepared to pay. After that night, Renee's behavior changed, but not in the way Tasha expected. The questions stopped. The late-night interrogations faded. Instead, Renee seemed pleasant, almost overly so. She started cooking Tasha's favorite meals again, bringing home small things she knew she liked, her favorite tea, a scarf she had once admired in a store window. When Michael called, she didn't linger nearby like before. She even encouraged Tasha to go out, have fun, as if she'd accepted the idea of her friend building a new life. For a while, Tasha let herself believe it. She told herself that maybe Renee had realized their friendship could survive change, that maybe, after years of depending on each other, they could both grow into something different without losing what they had. But there were cracks in the performance. On one occasion, Tasha came home from seeing Michael to find Renee quietly rearranging her things, moving her shoes, folding her laundry, placing a framed photo of the two of them in the center of her dresser. When Tasha asked why, Renee smiled and said, "Just making sure you don't forget where you belong." Other times, she would make seemingly innocent remarks that felt heavier than the words themselves. "You know, "Not everyone has your back the way I do," she'd say while chopping vegetables. Or, "It's a cold world out there. You have to be careful who you trust." Still, Renee's outward charm lulled Tasha into lowering her guard. She didn't notice the way Renee had started carrying a small notebook, jotting things down whenever Tasha mentioned her plans with Michael. She didn't realize that Renee had quietly befriended the cashier at the grocery store, where Tasha often met Michael, fishing for information with casual conversation. One Friday evening, Renee suggested they revive their old tradition of watching movies together. They laughed, ordered takeout, and for a few hours it felt like the old days. But when Tasha stepped out to take a phone call from Michael, Renee muted the TV and listened from the other room. She didn't say anything when Tasha returned, but her expression was tight, the warmth in her eyes gone. The final symbolic act came a week later. Renee handed Tasha a small wrapped package. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple, beautiful, and clearly expensive. "So you'll always have something of mine with you," Renee said. Tasha smiled politely, but something in her chest tightened. It wasn't the gift itself. It was the way Renee's fingers lingered on her wrist as she fastened it, as if marking territory. In those last days before everything unraveled, Tasha didn't see a storm brewing. She saw calm waters, unaware that the depth beneath her was shifting. Renee, however, had already made her decision. She wouldn't plead. She wouldn't beg. If Tasha wanted out, she would leave, but not alive. It happened on a Sunday night in late October, the kind of evening that carries the weight of change in the air. The clocks had just turned back, and darkness fell earlier than usual. Tasha had spent most of the day with Michael, helping him unpack boxes in his new apartment. She had been distracted, laughing more than she realized, letting the hours slip away. By the time she got home, Renee was already in the kitchen, the smell of rosemary chicken drifting through the air. "Long day?" Renee asked without looking up from the cutting board. "Yeah," Tasha said, setting down her bag. "Sorry I'm late." Dinner was unusually quiet. Renee asked polite questions about Michael's place, his job, his cooking skills. Tasha answered cautiously, sensing something behind the calm. When the plates were cleared, Renee suggested they have a drink together. Like old times. They sat at the small kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between sips. Renee began talking about the past, the winter they met, the nights they stayed up until dawn just to keep each other company, the promises they'd made when neither of them had anyone else. "I kept my promise," Renee said softly. "You were never alone." It was the way she said it, not as nostalgia, but as a closing statement that made Tasha's pulse quicken. She stood to refill her glass, but Renee reached out and placed a hand on her wrist. "Sit," she said. The next minutes would later be pieced together from Renee's own words and the physical evidence. There was no screaming, no drawn-out fight, just a sudden escalation, a flash of movement, a moment where control shifted entirely. When it was over, Tasha was still in her chair, her head tilted unnaturally to one side, the silver bracelet Renee had given her glinting under the kitchen light. Renee didn't panic. She didn't run. She tidied the table, washed the glasses, and folded the dish towel neatly over the sink. Then she stepped into the hallway and called a number she knew by heart, one she had never thought she'd use for this purpose. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. "There's been an incident," she told the dispatcher. "You should come." By the time the police arrived, Renee was seated on the stoop outside, a sweater draped over her shoulders, her face composed. She told them she had acted in self-defense. She told them Tasha had become aggressive, that she had no choice. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of rosemary and lemon, the plates still drying in the rack, as if the evening had been nothing more than an ordinary dinner between friends. From the start, detectives found Renee's account thin. Her claim of self-defense didn't match the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no defensive injuries on her body. The calm order of the kitchen told its own story, and it wasn't one of sudden chaos. Neighbours told investigators that Tasha and Renee rarely argued loudly, but several recalled overhearing tense conversations in the past month. One neighbour mentioned that Renee had been asking questions about Michael, like she was trying to find something wrong with him. Then came the most damning discovery. Tasha's phone. Found tucked inside her bag, it held a string of text messages from Renee sent earlier that evening, messages that seemed warm on the surface but now read like bait. Renee, I made your favourite. Don't be late. Renee, we should talk, just us. No phones, no distractions. The forensic team also recovered the small notebook Renee had been carrying. It wasn't a diary, it was a log. Pages of dates, times and notes about Tasha's outings with Michael, written in neat block letters. At the top of the final page was a single line underlined twice. If she leaves, I lose everything. In court, prosecutors painted Renee as a woman who had built her life around controlling one person, and when that control slipped, she chose to end it rather than face the loss. They played recordings of interviews where Renee's voice never wavered, never cracked, even when describing the night of Tasha's death. The defense tried to push the self-defense narrative, suggesting Tasha had been unstable, but the jury wasn't convinced. The calculated nature of the notes, the luring texts, and the lack of any real threat from Tasha outweighed the defense's claims. It took less than 4 hours of deliberation. Renee Carter was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in state prison. At sentencing, Michael Rivers spoke briefly. He didn't talk about himself. He spoke about Tasha, her quiet resilience, the way she was rebuilding her life, the excitement she had felt about the future. His voice broke only once when he said, she was finally free. And then she wasn't. Renee didn't react. She stared straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Today, she is housed at a women's correctional facility 2 hours from where the crime took place. Tasha's few remaining belongings, a box of photographs, some clothes, and that silver bracelet, were given to her cousin, who keeps them in a locked drawer. The bracelet has never been worn since. The final line in Renee's notebook, written after her arrest and before the trial, was never shown to the jury. It simply read, "If I can't be part of her story, then there will be no story." If you were in Tasha's shoes, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments. And if you thought this was shocking, wait until you hear about the childhood friends whose pact ended in tragedy. Subscribe so you don't miss it.